So welcome to you all. I don't think I've ever been at a conference when everybody's sitting down ready at least 10 minutes before the start. And I've also not been at a conference where I've actually worked with every one of the speakers. And that's most unusual. And can I just say, you are in for a really exciting day because the speakers are really outstanding. They're at the top of their game. So I'm really looking forward to learning a great deal from them. And I'll say a few words about each of them as we introduce them. I hope you'll forgive me, but slightly unusually, I'm going to just give a sort of preamble. And there's a reason for that. And I suppose the first point I want to make is a massive congratulations to Robert and Penny for sort of thinking ahead and picking probably one of the most important moments in time in terms of the future of the countryside. This is a really, really critical moment. And so I'm going to be quite ruthless and require all of you to respond by the 8th of May to the DEFRA consultation. It's really important you do that because I'm not exaggerating. This moment will go away very quickly, and it is absolutely going to be reconstructing the way the public sector intervenes. I would like to say supports the farming industry in terms of the future of the countryside. So it is an absolute critical moment, and the ramifications of the decisions being made, and they've started to be made, are going to go on for at least a century or more. So this is a really very critical time. And I think that the NFU, if the NFU members here, suddenly the farming industry is waking up to the scale of what is being suggested by the government. So there's a lot of anxiety going around. I know at least of 2 big NFU meetings in the last week in our region here, where farmers are being invited to hotels, and a lot of discussion is going on. So I can't emphasize that particular point enough. So my opening image is actually a field a couple of miles from here, just to the south of Reading. This is the Stratfield Say estate, the Duke of Wellington's estate. And I think the point I just want to make is an obvious one, that our landscape is a byproduct of the way we've chosen to manage and settle the land. And you will all know that landscape is more than just aesthetics. That landscape is actually about health, about well-being. It's about multifunctionalism, and we mustn't ever forget that function is extremely important and will drive the future. So we cannot look, of course, at the UK countryside in isolation from what's going on in the world. And I put that top point up about secure, sustainably produced food is a public good, because that's actually the Landscape Institute's position as being one of the top line public goods. And interestingly, we're almost alone in that. The Country Landowners Association, terribly nervous about public investment going into farming. The wildlife side, the extreme wildlife side, well, it's all about wildlife and nothing else. And I'm sorry, that's not meant to be provocative, but you know, there are extremes in this debate. And actually what we're trying to do, I think, colleagues in this room are trying to be more holistic and understanding that actually, if we get the landscape right, that is what the public will really value. So the trade negotiations around Brexit, they will define the future of the countryside. It is that serious. And we could either be driven to the bottom and operate unsustainably in the way that we have done, or we can excite Gove and say, you can influence the world. Because actually, if you demand sustainable food production standards in anything that comes into this country, you can then reach well beyond the UK. And Gove is a very ambitious man. I don't think I need to say any more than that. But I don't need to tell you about the issues around declining food production because of climate change, unsustainable fishing, the Chinese and Indians now, the wealthy middle classes eating much more meat. The pressure on food production is enormous. Rising populations, unsustainable rising populations. And so I go back to that particular point, that we need to nurture our farming industry and recognize that some of our richest habitats, terrestrial habitats, are defined by farming. And we need to respect that and ensure we've got systems in place. And of course, you know this map by, actually, you will see the symbols. This is Countryside Agency and English Nature prior to Natural England. But the character of the landscape defined by function defines our nation. The rich and varied landscapes, it is the diversity, the strong sense of place. The problem with it in terms of government is they see it as being purely visual. And what we've got to really drive hard is that diversity is defined by function, and we need to be attentive to the different needs. And what agriculture has tended to do is to manage out the diversity of the landscape. And what we need to do in terms of efficiency and effectiveness is to acknowledge that what defines that map is really the soils, the climate, the microclimate, the biodiversity, the topography, the geology, the water conditions, and how they have responded to human intervention. Now, the point here is that it's a scientific definition just as much as it is a visual one. And in terms of business planning, in terms of the natural capital agenda, of identifying clean water, clean air, restored soils, wildlife, if you want a target intervention, you couldn't do it better than use that map as the framework for setting the agenda at a subnational level and for delivery. So I won't say any more about that because Kate is going to be talking about the character areas, but I think that we do need to push our case at the moment, and I accept that 159 character areas sounds a bit like a nightmare bureaucratically, but actually a piece of work that we could usefully do is to look at a multiple of character areas in terms of perhaps round soils or something. So I think there's a bit more work to do in terms of management plans for each of those areas. So I'm going to just show you 3 more images. I have got the time to do that. And the first is really to take a piece of chalk landscape, accepting this is only one of the character areas. So I'm not going to go through all the different aspects of the English countryside. So this is a farm. I'm not going to say where it is. But if you were here 40 years ago looking at that, you would see a field on the right which was cut into 4. And a very, very important parish boundary, actually, coming in from the right down to the farmyard that you can see there. That contained oak trees of 400 years old. That was all bulldozed out by grants from the EU. And then, of course, with the guaranteed prices and guaranteed markets, well, the risk went out of mixed farming. So we almost lost mixed farming overnight in southern England. And when I tell you that all the animal accommodation on this farm was sold off with 5 acres, and I tell you that we've got there's 2 British airline pilots in one property. We've got the man that runs the Moscow Underground in another property. He's in absolutely, and he's wanting to sell his wares over here. I mean, it's amazing what's going on in the English landscape, and nobody has mapped the economy actually that is said to be rural, but actually nobody's mapped it. Nobody understands what's actually going on. And because why are they all there? Why are all these wealthy people there? They're there because of the landscape. That's, you know, they've made it very clear. They've come because the landscape is exquisite. But of course, the hidden issues here. Every time it rains, the soil goes out of the farm gate. On a chalk soil, it's redistributed as well as lost. The soil structure is non-existent. It survives because of its tons and tons of nitrates that are poured onto the land in this. And I'm describing a landscape, by the way, which is about 80% of the land, that central chalk belt from Kent through to Somerset. So this is a massive piece of agricultural landscape. The nitrates, well, very crudely, you know the statistics, about 50%. Doesn't matter how clever you are in terms of technology, about 50% gets to the crop. About 25% goes into the aquifer. And the aquifer here, by the way, is feeding the south coast conurbations from Southampton all the way through to Brighton and Hove and the other side of Brighton. Those water companies are now importing water to dilute the drinking water. So who is paying for that? The water taxpayer, certainly not the farming industry. And if we switch nitrates off on the chalk, it can either take a week to have an impact or 40 years, depending on the nature of the chalk. And there are 3 different varieties of chalk, as you probably well know. Slug pellets, they kill everything. Oh, sorry, I better just deal with the other bit of nitrates, of course. The other 25%, depending on humidity, goes up as nitrous oxide. Now, you will know that statistics on nitrous oxide, 300 times worse than carbon dioxide in terms of climate change gases. So it's very, very serious. The unintended consequences of the chemicalization of the landscape has never been properly mapped. Now, you might not take that from a landscape professional, but please, you can take it from the James Hutton Institute or Cranfield. And we are working very closely with the microbial scientists who specialize in soil. So this is a very polluted landscape. It might be attractive visually, but it is really polluted. As I said, the slug pellets kill everything. They kill the slugs, yes, but they also kill the slug-eating beetles. And I know it's a really old expression, but actually the balance of nature is really critical. And I think we've been seduced by fur and feathers. We really have not been attentive to the microbial health of our soils, really the foundation. We've been making a big noise about that with Michael Gove. So a similar grade 3 agricultural landscape, similar landscape on the chalk. This is Henry Evans at Chalderton. Here he has a private water company, so he's very attentive to water quality and very alarmed that nitrate levels were rising and rising. He doesn't put a grain of nitrogen on his land. He fixes nitrogen from the air using sophisticated integrated crop management systems and underseeding. So he has, it's a 2,500 acre estate, 2 very good dairy herds, half arable, and a flock of Hampshire down sheep. Because he uses the power of natural systems, which he's harnessed, his main production system is based upon harnessing the power rather than suppressing the power of natural systems. He knows the carbon content of his soils. Tell me how many farmers know that. He knows about the microbial health, and he has developed over many years using natural systems to getting a very, very rich, vibrant landscape, which is really healthy. He knows that he wants to pass on a soil to his son as a real asset. So he knows about the importance of soil quality and the legacy about soil management. And as a result, this is a field of Hampshire sandfoin, but as a result of using plants like that, he has 18 species of British bumblebee. There are only 23 in the UK. He has 18 different species of British bumblebee. And I won't go on in terms of the list but the landscape is teeming with wildlife. Absolutely. I counted 35 brown hare in one field. 35 brown hare in one field. And the quality of the crops is fabulous. I can't tell you how important I think this man is. And we are doing, because of course we are basically using the farming industry, the best practice in the farming industry, and trying to advocate it. We've had George Eustace out twice now. He's been there, and we've just received a very nice letter from him saying how much his visit had an impact upon driving the new agenda. And Michael Gove has just asked to come round this farm. That's just between us, please. And I've put him off because I don't want him to see the wildlife. I want to see him the value of the crops as side by side, aligned with a rich and vibrant landscape. So very quickly, I must close. But when you all respond to the consultation on the 8th of May, you will see problems with it. By the way, I think one of the big problems is that you're going to be. There are lots of questions about, will you give a hierarchy out of this list? Well, don't be bullied into that. If they were then going to analyse the landscape type differences to the answers, then I would be a bit more optimistic. But I have asked the question, are you going to link this with geography? And I have not had an answer yet. So they're going to get a lot of disjointed answers to the questions, I'm afraid, and I don't know how they're going to analyse them. But don't be put off by that. I really think there are some fairly fundamental principles. First of all, Gove is talking about all farmland. Wow, you know. It was the Labour government that brought in the Environmental Stewardship Programme, and they targeted 70% of farmland, which they almost, Natural England almost achieved. And then Ern Patterson, of course, came in, removed the entry level, not understanding what entry level was about. It was really about the start of a conversation rather than an end result. And he reduced the target from 70% to 35%. And not a whisper from the public, who don't understand the hundreds of millions of wasted resources, but also the fact that that conversation was terminated. You know, a lot of farmers were saying, okay, let's explore this. Even some of the very extreme hardliners, let's explore this. And what did he do? He cut down the conversation. Well, that turned the farming industry away. The farming industry had been really badly treated. So they've given a commitment to the 4 billion, but just for the life of this parliament. Well, that's not good enough. We need, if we're going to talk about 25 years, we need an investment for 25 years, because the transition from where we are now to where we want to be is massive. And the farming industry needs time to change. Public goods for public money, of course, and not a penny more for polluting operations. Accountable. There's no talk in that consultation about accountability. We think that's a really serious omission. We must collaborate. The system that you probably know all about, the disallowance rules of the EU have meant that we have to claim back money that we have given out to the farming industry. And dear Gordon Brown inherited a huge deficit when Europe rejected and disallowed our submission back. So we really must collaborate with the industry and not confront them in the way that we have done. And we've got to have a system that harnesses the power of natural systems, as I've said. And we must make sure that our intervention respects the variety, the rich variety of the English countryside. So I'm going to end there. You've been immensely patient. And I'm going to now introduce Adrian Phillips as our next speaker.